Have you ever wondered if your so-called goodness is actually killing you? Not physically, but spiritually. Have you ever caught yourself smiling when you wanted to scream? Agreeing when everything in your body said, hell no? Staying quiet, polite, obedient, because that's what a good man is supposed to do? Let me ask you something real. When did you first learn that being silent made you lovable? That being selfless made you safe? That if you just worked harder, gave more, sacrificed more, someone might finally see you? You've been told that goodness makes you free. But what if that was the biggest lie of your life? Because if you're like most men, especially the strong, capable ones, you were taught that your power is dangerous, that your anger must be buried, that your wants are selfish, that your strength must be tamed. So you became good. You shrank. You learned to please, to adapt, to be useful, and maybe they even praised you for it. But deep down, do you ever feel like something is breaking inside you? Like your soul is being taxed just to survive? This video isn't about rebellion for the sake of it. It's about a truth you've been avoiding. You don't need to be better. You need to be real. And real isn't always nice. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it's selfish. Sometimes it breaks the rules. But it's alive. If you've ever looked in the mirror and seen a stranger staring back, keep watching, because what you've called virtue might just be your cage. By now, maybe you're starting to see it. The relationship wasn't built on love. It was built on obligation. Not from her directly, not always through words, but through the subtle, soul-crushing pressure that if you left, she would fall apart. So you stayed, not because you were happy, not because you were growing, but because you were terrified of what would happen to her if you walked away. That's the invisible trap, false emotional responsibility. It's not about romance anymore. It's about emotional hostage-taking disguised as compassion. You tell yourself things like, she's been through so much. I can't be another person who abandons her. If I leave, she'll spiral. I'm the only one keeping her grounded. It's not perfect, but she needs me right now. And that sounds noble, even heroic. But let's call it what it really is, a prison with gold bars. You've become her emotional caretaker, her unpaid therapist, her crutch, and slowly, her captive. Carl Jung called this a form of archetypal identification, when we unconsciously take on the role of the martyr or savior. You sacrifice your peace, your time, your identity, not out of choice, but out of guilt. But here's the truth no one tells you. You're not her healer. You're her distraction. And every time you patch her wounds, you delay her growth. Every time you soften the blow, you enable the dysfunction. Every time you excuse her chaos, you betray your own stability. She's not getting better, and you're getting worse. You carry her pain like it's your responsibility. But ask yourself, did you cause it? Were you the one who hurt her before? Are you the root of her damage? If not, then why are you bleeding for wounds that aren't yours? The hard truth is this. Your love cannot fix what someone refuses to face in themselves. And yet, you've made it your mission. Because on some level, being needed makes you feel valuable. Her instability makes you feel essential. Her breakdowns give you a purpose. But that's not love. That's emotional codependency. And the more broken she becomes, the more responsible you feel. It's a cycle. She shatters. You pick up the pieces. She cries. You silence your needs. She lashes out. You justify it. And over time, you begin to believe that you leaving would be the ultimate betrayal. But what if it's not betrayal? What if leaving is the only act of truth left? What if the real betrayal was abandoning yourself in the first place? Brother, you are not responsible for carrying someone who refuses to walk. You are not obligated to bleed in the name of love. And you are not cruel for choosing yourself. You can care. You can empathize. But you don't have to stay. Because love isn't supposed to feel like emotional parenthood. It isn't meant to demand your entire identity in exchange for temporary peace. When you confuse compassion with responsibility, you become trapped in a role you were never meant to play. And while you hold her up, you slowly fall apart. In the next section, we're going to face the darkest consequence of all this, the loss of identity. The moment when you no longer recognize who you are without her, and the terrifying silence that follows when the noise of codependency finally fades. You've spent your life trying to be good, And for what? To be liked, to be accepted, to be told you're a man of character? But what if I told you that everything you've been taught about goodness was never meant to make you free? That's exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about. He saw through the illusion most men never question. That morality, the kind that praises self-sacrifice, silence, and obedience, is not about virtue. It's about control. And it starts early. From childhood, you were rewarded for following the rules, for being quiet, for being helpful. You were punished for being wild, for questioning, for speaking your mind. So you learned that good boys don't make waves, that men who want to be loved must learn to behave. And you call that growth. But Nietzsche called it domestication. He believed that society has trained you like an animal, not to liberate your soul, but to tame it, to break your will and reward you for being predictable. This is what he meant by slave morality. It's a system built by the weak for the weak, a morality that praises meekness because it fears strength, a morality that punishes intensity because it cannot handle truth. And you've been living inside that system your whole life. You were taught that wanting something for yourself is selfish, that power corrupts, that humility means shrinking, that ego is evil. But Nietzsche flipped the whole script. He said, God is dead. Not as an attack on religion, but as a declaration that the old moral frameworks are collapsing, that the commandments we inherited, be obedient, be nice, turn the other cheek, were never absolute truths. They were tools of control. And when those tools break, what's left? Freedom. Terrifying freedom. But with it comes a question most men can't answer. If you're no longer obeying someone else's rules, then who are you? Nietzsche didn't give us comforting answers. He gave us a challenge. He said that man is not the end. Man is a bridge between the animal and something greater. The Übermensch, the overman, not a superhero, not a tyrant, but a man who creates his own values, who no longer needs external permission to live with power, a man who doesn't live to please, but to express, to build, to become. This man is dangerous, not because he harms others, but because he doesn't belong to the herd. He doesn't play by society's rules, and that makes him unpredictable, uncontrollable, and that's exactly what the world fears. You see, society doesn't actually want good men. It wants safe men, men who serve, men who yield, men who keep their heads down and stay in line. But the Übermensch breaks the line. He doesn't rebel like a child. He transcends like a creator. He doesn't scream for attention. He becomes undeniable. And here's the part that stings. You were meant to become that man. But somewhere along the way, you settled. You traded your fire for acceptance, your voice for approval, your edge for comfort. Nietzsche didn't want you to rebel just to feel alive. He wanted you to become someone who no longer needs rebellion, because you've built a world that reflects your truth, your values, your power, your freedom. But you can't get there by being good. You get there by being real, by tearing off the masks, by facing the chaos within you, by standing in the fire of your own becoming, alone, unafraid. And here's the truth no one tells you. You don't need another rule book. You don't need another system to follow. You need to destroy the one you've been trapped in. You need to become the man who writes his own code. Because until you do, you're not free. And maybe that scares you. Good. Because Nietzsche wasn't offering comfort. He was offering transformation. The kind that cost you everything you thought you were, to become everything you were meant to be. You've been told your whole life that virtue is sacrifice, that being good means denying yourself, that the more you suppress your desires, your voice, your truth, the more noble you are. But Nietzsche saw through that illusion. He didn't just attack morality, he dissected it. And what he exposed is this. Most people don't act from goodness. They act from fear, from guilt, from a deep need to be approved, and they call it virtue. Let's call it what it really is, a refined form of obedience. Because what you were taught to call character was actually your conditioning. You weren't taught how to lead. You were taught how to submit and smile while doing it. But Nietzsche proposed something radical. That real virtue doesn't come from repression, it comes from overflow. Let me say that again. Real virtue doesn't come from effort. It comes from excess. It's the difference between a starving man offering his last piece of bread and a king with a full table inviting others to feast, not because he's supposed to, but because he can't help but give. That's what Nietzsche called the virtue that gives. It doesn't come from guilt. It doesn't come from duty. It doesn't come from needing to be seen as good. It comes from fullness, from a man who's so alive, so aligned, so overflowing with power, that giving becomes natural. No applause, no shame, no performance, just essence. Now let's contrast it. The virtue that demands, says give more or you're selfish, seeks recognition and approval, thrives on guilt and obligation, requires self-neglect to prove worth, fears rejection more than it desires truth. The virtue that gives, says give only when full, doesn't care who notices, comes from abundance, not lack, honors self as much as others, values truth more than validation. Do you feel the difference? One traps you in performance. The other frees you to be powerful. One keeps you on your knees hoping to be chosen. The other reminds you, you were never meant to kneel at all. But here's the catch. The world praises the first kind, the obedient kind, the martyr, the servant, the one who bends. Why? Because it's safe, predictable, easily controlled. But the man who gives from his power, he terrifies them because he cannot be manipulated. He doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't need to be liked. He simply is. And that's the shift you're being asked to make. From the man who performs for love, to the man who gives from overflowing truth, from the man who plays the role, to the man who writes his own script, from the man who serves to be seen, to the man who disappears without apology when his soul needs silence. And maybe that idea unsettles you. Maybe it makes you uncomfortable, because you've spent your life being told that self-sacrifice is the highest form of love. But what if that belief was never yours? What if it was planted in you by a system that wanted you to be tame? Look at your life. How many times have you said yes when your soul screamed no? How many times have you bent, apologized, compromised just to be accepted? And how many times has that left you feeling respected? The hard truth? It hasn't. Because people don't respect obedience. They use it. They expect it. But what they do respect, what they cannot ignore, is a man who gives from strength, from clarity, from sovereignty. And here's the turning point. You don't have to earn that strength. It's already inside you. You just have to stop draining it by living someone else's idea of what a man should be. You have to unlearn the guilt, unlearn the shame, unlearn the addiction to being needed, and instead build a life so full, so authentic, that giving becomes effortless, not because you're supposed to, but because that's who you become. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes he's been living someone else's dream, not his own, not his soul's, but a version of life crafted by others, parents, religion, culture, society. You wake up one day and the suit no longer fits. The praise doesn't satisfy. The approval doesn't soothe the ache. Because somewhere along the way, you traded your fire for a smile. You became good at being good, but you forgot how to be alive. And here's a spiritual truth no one told you. True goodness doesn't come from effort. It comes from presence. It doesn't bloom from guilt. It rises from overflow. You were never meant to strive your way into being worthy. You were meant to remember that you already are. Nietzsche wasn't just talking philosophy. He was pointing to a spiritual revolution. The death of fake virtue, the death of false identity, the death of the obedient, tamed man, and in its place, the birth of a creator, a man who gives, not because he's supposed to, but because he can't not. A man who doesn't sacrifice himself to be loved. He becomes love in motion. But to get there, you have to stop running from the one thing that scares you the most, your own power. Because your power isn't the problem. It's not dangerous. It's not arrogant. It's not selfish. It's sacred. It's the part of you that says, I know who I am, and I will not shrink to fit your comfort anymore. This isn't about domination. It's not about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's about wholeness. It's about reclaiming the energy you've scattered across 1,000 performances and bringing it home. The world told you to be useful, to be needed, to give and give and give until you disappear. But there's a deeper way, a more ancient path, a path not of martyrdom, but of mastery. And it starts when you stop asking the question, am I good enough? And start asking, am I true enough? Because when you live from truth, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need applause. You don't need a halo. You don't need to be seen. You just are. Like the sun, like the ocean, like the quiet confidence of a man who's made peace with himself. This is the virtue that gives, the one that flows naturally, freely, powerfully, not because of obligation, but because of abundance. You no longer give because you're empty and hoping to be filled. You give because you're overflowing. You give because your heart has been lit with something real, and now it radiates. But here's the twist. Even this purest virtue has a cycle. Even the sun sets. Even the strongest man must learn to retreat, to recharge, to return to the source. Because true giving isn't constant, it's conscious. And the man who never stops giving isn't noble. He's bleeding. He's burning out. He's addicted to being needed. But the man who knows when to step back, to sit in silence, to listen to his soul, to disappear without explanation. That man, he's free. He understands that his value doesn't disappear when his voice does, that his presence is still power, even when it's quiet. And that's the final layer of spiritual truth Nietzsche points to. The mature man doesn't just give. He knows when to stop giving. He knows that even the greatest light needs rest, that even the strongest soul needs space, that true presence is born in silence. So if you're feeling empty, if you're tired of being strong for everyone else, if you feel the need to pull back, not out of weakness, but from wisdom, listen to it. That voice in you isn't confusion. It's clarity. It's calling you inward, not to abandon the world, but to remember the part of you the world could never touch, the part that gives not from pressure, but from power. Even the most radiant fire must one day dim. Even the virtue that overflows, the one born of fullness, not fear, must eventually fall quiet. Because everything sacred follows one law. It must die to live again. Nietzsche didn't romanticize this. He didn't paint virtue as something eternal. He saw it clearly. Even the most powerful state of being has a cycle. And if you ignore that truth, you start to rot inside. Not because you've lost your goodness, but because you've stayed too long in the light. You gave, you poured, you burned with presence. But now, you're empty, not broken, not weak, just done. And that's not failure. That's wisdom. You see, most men are taught to give until they disappear, to never stop, to never rest, to equate stillness with laziness, silence with failure. But the truth? Silence is sacred. Withdrawal is divine. Disappearance is a form of power. Because in the stillness, you return to your source. Zarathustra, after giving everything, didn't stay on the mountain shouting his truth. He vanished. He went silent, not from defeat, but from clarity. He understood what few ever do. That true virtue knows when to stop. It doesn't cling. It doesn't demand to be remembered. It doesn't try to eternalize its light. It shines, and then it lets go. But we're not taught that, are we? We're told to always be available, to always show up, to be the dependable one, the rock, the provider. And if we pull back, even for a breath, we're judged, we're questioned, we're called selfish, cold, distant. So most men keep pushing. They burn themselves to keep others warm. They overextend. They pretend they're fine. They die slowly, with a smile on their face. But there's another way, a way where you don't have to explain your silence, where your disappearance isn't abandonment, it's renewal. Because here's what no one says aloud. Your worth does not vanish when you vanish. Your value doesn't depend on how much you give. You are not a machine. You're a soul. And even the soul needs winter. There is power in stepping away, power in pulling your energy back, power in sitting in the dark, alone, unbothered, unapologetic. Because in that space, you begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that's been shaped by duty or expectation, but the deeper one, the one that whispers, you are enough, even when you're still. This is the death of virtue, not in the tragic sense, but in the sacred sense. Because the man who truly gives must also know how to release, to let his light flicker out for a time so it can return stronger. Even the sun sets. Even the ocean retreats from the shore. So why do you believe you must shine forever without pause? That belief is not strength. It's ego. The part of you that wants to be remembered, wants to be needed, wants to be the hero. But the wise man knows. Real impact doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being true. And sometimes the truest thing you can do is disappear. Not to abandon, but to rebuild. Not to quit, but to reset. Not to hide, but to return. Whole. So if you feel tired, if you feel unseen, if you feel the pull to vanish for a while, listen, this isn't your collapse. It's your calling. It's your next evolution. Let the old virtue die. Let the silence come. And in that space, where no one is watching, you will meet the man you were always meant to become. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence. It feels like returning home, not to the world, but to yourself. After the noise, the expectations, the weight of being everything to everyone, you step back, not out of weakness, but from wisdom, because you've seen the truth. Even the most powerful man can't give forever. Even the strongest fire needs darkness to burn brighter. This is the kind of silence that rebuilds you. You unplug. You stop performing. You stop proving. And in that space, something sacred begins to stir. Not the man they trained you to be, but the man you were before the world got to you. He's still there. The one who speaks less, but means more. The one who moves slower, but with deeper impact. The one who doesn't chase, he draws. This is your rebirth. You're not disappearing. You're refining. You're shedding the false layers, the performance, the pressure. And when you return, you won't come back as the man who left. You'll come back as the man who finally remembered. I don't need to be seen to be powerful. I don't need to be needed to be worthy. I don't need to be loud to be heard. I choose the silence that rebuilds me. Write it, say it, live it. Your next chapter begins in the quiet.